Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we are going to be discussing language, which is one of the favorite topics of mine. If anybody has joined me in past episodes, you'll know that I love to talk about how we talk about chocolate and how the words we use inform our beliefs, how our beliefs inform our actions, and how our actions have consequences. Now, before I jump into this, and I notice there's a little bit of delay, I'm not entirely sure what that is. What I want to do is I want to share with everybody that this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. You can go there and you can click on the links here, especially to this episode. For every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I produce a post on the Chocolate Life, and this is the post for today's episode. And before we jump into all of that, what I'd like to remind everybody is to go into the live chat on YouTube or into the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook and let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I'll get that shout out up on screen. And if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make at any point during the episode, please let me know. I will get that question or comment up on screen, and I'll do my best to answer it during the course of the episode. If I don't, what I will do is I will go and I will answer the question later on in the comments section to this post. And with all that out of the way, let us get started with the topic for today. So in some respects, this is a kind of response video. I subscribe to a newsletter from a writer by the name of Tony Myers. I met Tony when he was the editor at Confectionery News. And we saw each other at, for example, the launch of Ruby, Barry Callebaut in Shanghai. We met up again at the second generation launch in Venice. So Tony and I have been in and out of each other's circles for 7 or 8 years at least. And when he left Confectionery News, he started this newsletter called Cocoa Radar. And I was looking at it when it came in, and because I know Ali Gower, who is one of the co-founders of Chocolate Tree, I know Ali and his wife Frederica, and I probably met them for the first time, I want to say 2015, 2016 at Chocoa in Amsterdam. I've also seen them at the Chocolate Show in London when I was visiting. It's been some time since I've seen them in person. But I know Ali and I know Freddie, and so when this article showed up in Cocoa Radar, my interest was piqued, right? Because I've talked a lot about what my definition for craft chocolate was, and I wanted to know what it was about the definition of craft chocolate that Ali thought was under a threat. And that's where we're going to go right now. Right? Now, unfortunately, I have a highlighting tool, and for some reason it's working meh on this particular page. I'm going to do some reading. And I hope you don't mind that I'm going to be doing that reading. But Ali starts out, it takes years of hard work to make a commercial success of bean-to-bar chocolate. And it is heartbreaking to be bypassed by a competitor who is using a shortcut to profit from our story of authentic manufacture. And in this, I completely agree. Now, you can go to this post on the Chocolate Life. You can follow along. If you're listening to this or you're watching it some later time, the link is on the page. So if you don't catch what the link is, you'll be able to go back and refer to it. I do that rather than putting these links in the show notes on YouTube. I put them here on the Chocolate Life. So he says, going down a little further, when we started our bean-to-bar journey in 2011, it was clear to us that our couverture-made chocolates, so they bought in couverture, and I know they made at least confections, but they were very careful to separate their couverture-made chocolates from the chocolates they were making from the beans that they brought in, so that our couverture-made chocolate should not be confused with our bean-to-bar chocolate. For the sake of our integrity as bean-to-bar makers, we offered our customers proper transparency. And this is a conversation that I've had with Ali and Freddie over the years. I think it's exactly the right thing to do. Right? If you are making chocolate from beans, which can be very expensive to do, there's no reason why you can't buy in some couverture and use it for some part of your product line, as long as you're very clear to differentiate between what you're making yourself and what you're buying in and melting. So scrolling down, and this is where one of the links doesn't work. So Ali goes on to say, he was looking on my Instagram to see a post by a chocolate blogger here in the United States who had received a box from Cocoa Runners in the UK containing chocolate from Chocolate Tree, Bare Bones, and Ocelot. So Chocolate Tree and Bare Bones work from bean to bar. Ocelot is melting original beans couverture made by Felchlin in Switzerland. The post's author incorrectly assumes Ocelot is making chocolate from bean to bar, and this is not the first time it has happened. I, Ali, have seen so far 3 social media posts in which Ocelot is mistaking for making chocolate from bean to bar, #bean2bar. So when the definition of craft chocolate becomes blurred like this, it endangers the future of all real chocolate makers. Clearly, the definition of craft chocolate is at risk if Cocoa Runners, and not just Cocoa Runners, but Cocoa Runners as a proxy for everybody who does this, validates Ocelot as a chocolate maker. And I think that one of the reasons why Ali is singling out Cocoa Runners is because Cocoa Runners is one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant, distributors of craft chocolate in the United Kingdom. Right? So Ocelot is now owned by Original Beans, which you may or may not have known, right? Which markets its chocolate in a way that allows it to take market share from authentic, right, craft chocolate makers. So Ali goes on to say, I'm presenting the case that craft chocolate is in a fragile moment when the definition of what it means to be a craft chocolate maker could decide the future of people and companies, right? Like Ali and his wife, Frederica, who is a co-founder, who have toiled now for almost a decade and a half to create a new sector in the market that stands for transparency, integrity, and craftsmanship. So if we accept Ocelot remelting couverture made for original beans by Felchlin in Switzerland, that it can be considered as Scottish craft chocolate, right? And that their team are chocolate makers, then this opens the door for other couverture chocolatiers to redefine themselves, right? Couverture chocolatiers to redefine themselves as craft chocolate makers. Just allow me just a couple of more paragraphs. Most wholesale buyers and retailers, Ali, meet at the shows we exhibit at are confused by the chocolate industry's terminology. They don't know that Mondelez internationally owns Who or Hugh, or that Casalucar is the couverture that most small UK chocolate brands use. They are misled by claims on the packs of these bars, such as Farm to Bar by a company called Cox & Co., and Every Bean We Use by Chalk Affair, both of which refer to Casalucar. So this is an interesting take on the use of language and how we identify ourselves, and how, if we are not careful, and this is a challenge that I have brought on many occasions, if we are not careful about how we use and how we allow these terms to be used, they are going to be taken from us. So one of the best examples is the phrase bean to bar. So the phrase bean to bar was in fact coined in the late 1990s, 96 or 97, by John Scharfenberger and Robert Steinberg, who are the co-founders of Scharfenberger Chocolate. And they created the phrase, they coined the phrase to differentiate what they were doing compared with what big companies like Valrhona were doing. And having had an opportunity to interview John, I know that a lot of the impetus for how Scharfenberger thought of itself in the early days came from a desire to separate them from what it is that big companies who were in the gourmet space, specifically Valrhona, were thinking about themselves and talking about themselves and what they were doing. And so what we've seen is that over the course of the last now nearly 30 years, which is a scary thought, from the late 90s to the mid 20s, that the phrase bean to bar has been co-opted by big chocolate. When a company like Ghirardelli, which is owned by Lindt, can put on the front of its packages, proudly bean to bar, our commitment to ultimate quality, the phrase bean to bar has been, to some extent, co-opted, and it becomes much, much more difficult for a small chocolate maker, a craft chocolate maker, for example, to differentiate itself from them, from big chocolate. And the question is, at what point will the small maker market lose control of a word like craft? What does craft mean? Now, I have gone into that in great detail. My view of craft is to be able to compare it with an industrial. So an industrial chocolate maker starts off with the end goal in mind. Right? The goal is for a product that has technical workability and flavor, which is the same from batch to batch to batch, because customers demand that consistency. Whereas a craft chocolate maker starts off with, oh, I have some beans. How do I maximize the flavor expression of these beans through the lens of my aesthetic as a chocolate maker? And so we're differentiating craft and industrial by intent. We're not saying that, well, you can be craft if you process under 200 metric tons of beans a year, and if you're over 200 metric tons of beans, you're automatically industrial. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because it doesn't talk about intent. I'm not saying that the largest batch size you can use is in a 100-kilogram melanger, and I'm not saying it has to be a melanger and not a ball mill. I'm not saying anything about the origin of the beans. I'm not saying anything about anything. It's just about the creative intent. Right? An industrial maker starts off with the end goal in mind, and the craft maker starts off going, ooh, here's a flavor opportunity. Here's a creative opportunity for me. So let's examine that idea about craft in the context of the way that Ocelot and Original Beans represent themselves. And if anybody from Ocelot is watching, you need to go think about the way the image, which is on your website, which is captured when a site scrapes it represents. You've got work to do here because it doesn't fit within the technical constraints. So just a quick heads up, right? So also, you'll notice that the organic craft chocolate here interferes with the navigation. It overcomes shop, so they're going to have to do something to make the site more responsive. So just another heads up about doing it. But here's, I think, where we have to think about how companies represent themselves. So Ocelot refers to themselves as organic craft chocolate. Now, if you go to their About Us page and talk about their ethics, what they do is they're saying, why should you choose Ocelot? So they support farmers, and they mention this company called Original Beans, and we grow trees, and they mention this company called Original Beans, right? But what they don't do is they don't represent that what they're doing is they're buying couverture from Original Beans, and they're using original couverture beans, melting it down, and they're using that as the basis for their bars. If you're not very, very careful, you might think that when they say craft chocolate, people might go, oh, this is a synonym for being a bean to bar chocolate maker. So in this particular case, Ocelot, in the way it's not referring to its relationship with Original Beans, is being disingenuous. They are committing errors of omission by not being fully transparent and fully open about the relationship with Original Beans on the website. And for people who may not know, they were about to go under, I think in 2022, and Original Beans purchased them. So they are now a subsidiary, or their sister companies. How I really don't know what the corporate relationship is in terms of a hierarchy. But now Ocelot is a part of Original Beans. And I looked, and I didn't see any place on the website where Ocelot mentions that it is owned by Original Beans. Right? And there's no place on the website where Ocelot says, we use Original Beans couverture. And so Ali is perfectly justified to say in my opinion, Ali is perfectly justified to call out Ocelot and say, hey guys, you are being disingenuous in the way you are representing your company and what they do. You may be users of organic craft chocolate, and I'm going to suggest that no, maybe not craft. You may be users of organic chocolate, right? But you're buying couverture from a company you're not disclosing, right? In part because it's at one additional arm's length set of relationship. And the average consumer can't spend enough time going through and examining the claims of every chocolate maker to determine if they're actually doing what it is they say that they're doing. And so Ali is correct when he says we run the risk of diluting the value of the words that we use if consumers can no longer trust them. Right? How does that work? Right? What are we supposed to do? And in some respects, I think about the denominación de origen of Chihuahua in Venezuela. There is a denomination in Venezuela for Chihuahua, specifically Chihuahua Village, although the denomination is poorly written. And so it extends to Chihuahua Valley. And now there is more cocoa, which is exported as Chihuahua than would be originally allowed under the denomination. But if you're going to get a denomination of origin, which is recognized by the World Intellectual Property Organization, the government has to enforce its use. And the government of Venezuela has not been enforcing its use. So Chihuahua as a name is now one that can't be trusted in many respects because you don't know which beans they're referring to, which is a challenge for everybody if we're looking for transparency. Although, if we look at my definition of what craft versus industrial is, that difference, transparency is not conflated into the definition. I'm a big believer in a principle called Occam's razor, which is you want to use the explanation which adds the fewest possible assumptions. So I could be a craft chocolate maker and be totally non-transparent. I could be a craft chocolate maker and I could be very transparent. I could be an industrial chocolate maker and be totally transparent. I could be an industrial chocolate maker and be totally non-transparent. Although I would prefer the word usability, and in general, I prefer to use the word genuine over authentic. But so I want to be careful not to conflate the idea that in order to be a craft chocolate maker, you must be transparent. I mean, it is a good thing to do. I think you should endeavor, every business should endeavor to be transparent about what it is that they're doing, but it's not a part of the base definition of craft. So Ocelot calls itself organic craft chocolate. Well, let's examine this. We know that Original Beans is now the owner of Ocelot, and let's go to look at the Original Beans website. I have to say that I have known Philip Kaufman, who's the founder of this company. I've known him for, I want to say, since well more than a decade, and maybe quite a bit longer than that. And I know other people. I don't know that I've interviewed Jan Sherwood, who is part of his sourcing team, but I also know some other people who are associated with this. And the family has got great chops. Right? I got to admit that. But here is the Original Beans website, and you go take a look at the About Us, let's take a look at the Our Chocolate page and how it's crafted. And I'm going to do a quick shortcut here and do a search. And at no point does Original Beans mention a relationship with Felchlin, right? And so this is a problem for me. I think it's widely known within the industry that Felchlin actually manufactures the chocolate for Original Beans, but they're not owning up to it. And so because of this, once removed, this arm-length arrangement, somebody who's going to Ocelot who sees the mention of Original Beans doesn't know that Original Beans has Felchlin make its chocolate for them. And I would argue that the chocolate that Felchlin makes for Original Beans is industrial because the vast majority of it, and maybe 100% of it, is in fact industrial, right? If Original Beans is selling couverture to be used by companies like Ocelot, then it needs to be the same chocolate all the time. It needs to have the same flavor profile. It needs to have the same technical workability, in the sense that it needs to have the same flow characteristics, the same rheology. It needs to have the same acidity, not just from a flavor perspective, but if you're baking with it, and you need to make sure that the acidity is the same, so that if you're using a leavening agent, right, that it rises the same way every single time. The pH is changing all the time. It's a real challenge to use it. And so what's going on here is that Original Beans is also being not completely transparent about the fact that, oh, there's this other company called Felchlin that is making our chocolate for us. And that's a problem because, again, if I'm a general chocolate consumer, I've got the ideas like, okay, I go to Ocelot. I really like the brand. I've had some of their bars. It was tasty. I knew that they were owned by Original Beans. I knew that they were using an Original Beans couverture. So I'm aware of that, but it's my job. It's my job to know these things. The average consumer isn't. And the real issue, as Ali says, is does the fact that companies are using these terms in a way that's disingenuous, right? In the sense that we claim we've got ethics, but we're not being fully transparent, right? Is transparency an ethic that they should care about, and they should be open with every single one of their customers about what it is that they're doing? Does it put the people who are, Ali describes them as taking shortcuts, does it take those people who are buying in couverture and melting it, does it put them on a different foot? And I can tell you the answer is yes. The set of skills that it required to be good at transforming cocoa beans into chocolate are very different from the skills necessary to take a chocolate, melt it, melt it and temper it in a continuous tempering machine, and just put it into a custom bar mold. Those are an entirely different set of skills, right? You could take the chocolate, add some flavorings in it, add some inclusions in it, but those skills are nothing compared with the skill of actually transforming the beans. And so we want to be careful about how we're using these terms. So we think about being a craft chocolate maker, we think about a bean to bar chocolate maker, but how do we think about the term craft when we're talking about a chocolatier who is in fact, just remelting chocolate? Right? It's a real challenge. Now, I have to admit that I haven't spent a huge amount of time thinking about that challenge, that aspect of things, other than to say, okay, what we as an industry need to do is we need to come up with a common lexicon about the way we're going to agree to use terms, and then we are going to message to consumers about what all these things mean. And this is, I'm looking at the comments that are coming in. So we have Bjorn Becker from Mike and Becky's in Brussels. Bjorn, you may know that I was in Brussels in late October. Unfortunately, I didn't have a spare day in order to get together with you. So, hi, isn't this the Mast Brothers scandal all over again? When will we decide and write our community rule definition book? So in some respects, Bjorn, the answer is yes. And I'm going to get to some aspects of it with respect to both the Mast Brothers and another company here in the United States called Noka, right? And talk about the potential downsides when it comes to being deliberately disingenuous, right? I don't know that Ocelot are being deliberately disingenuous. I think that they are committing errors of omission by not mentioning things. Is it deliberate? I'm not going to ascribe intentions to what it is that they're doing. I don't know. I haven't spoken with them about it. If anybody from Ocelot wants to come and talk with me, if anybody from Original Beans wants to come and correspond with me, I'd be happy to put together an episode where we talk about all those things. The other aspect of this that you mentioned, Bjorn, is important. When will we decide and write our community rule book? This is something that I've been working on for the last couple of years. And Bjorn, I know that it's something, we have discussed this at Chocoa, and when I was in Brussels, when was it, in 2020, just before lockdowns, and I went and visited your shop. Right now, there is an opportunity to go within the new European Bean to Bar Association. And Ali connected with Vincent, who is the new president for the next 5 years. I would love to start to have the conversation about how we go and make that happen. As far as I'm concerned, one of the real challenges that the small maker, so the craft slash bean to bar movement, right, has not been able to do is it's not been able to come to, here's how we are going to use these words, and we're going to use them consistently, and we're going to take out marketing. We're going to pay for marketing, right? Whether it's social media marketing, whatever, but we're going to use these words the same way, right? So that people know that if you're a member of these associations like the European Bean to Bar Association, I think there's one in Spain. I don't know if they're connecting up together. I mean, hopefully I will hear from Vincent and again, Bjorn, if you can influence him to get back to me sooner rather than later about that. I want to have this discussion because I believe it's absolutely important. I think it's also absolutely important that we work from first principles, right? That we start from the bottom up using an Occam's razor approach and try to come up with a set of definition where the fewest assumptions possible get layered into the base definitions. And then we can say, so we don't want to say, in order to be a bean to bar maker, you must be transparent. Or in order to be a bean to bar maker, you must be ethical. Or in order to be a bean to bar maker, you must be sustainable, right? If you're going to do that, if you say, in order to be a bean to bar maker, you must be transparent and ethical and sustainable, now all of a sudden you've got this challenge of getting everybody to agree on what the definition of ethical and sustainable and transparent are, right? In order to get them to agree on what the definition of craft is. And I don't want to do that. I want to make that decision as easy as possible, right? To adopt a term, right? And then makers could say, oh, I call myself a craft chocolate maker. It's around the notion of intent. I start out every chocolate knowing that the beans that I'm using are different, and my job is to express the flavor potential of the beans using through the lens of my aesthetic as a chocolate maker. We'll start there. Now, if you also want to say that you're transparent and sustainable, you can also say those things, but they don't have an impact on what the definition of craft is. Right? And so going back to this original beans, let me put that up on the screen. Going back to original beans, I would argue, I don't know that I would argue successfully, but I have been at the Felchlin factory in Schwyz in Switzerland. It was 2008. I haven't been there in a while, right? But I've seen the factory, and I do know what was at the time their production pathway. Starting from roasting through liquor grinding, running through a 5-roll mill into conchas. And I do know that there was some of their production went through big industrial conchas, and some of their production went into some old longitudinal conchas. And it's at that point that we can say, is the stuff that's going into the longitudinal conchas craft, right? And that's why I suppose I could make the observation that that is in fact the case. But I don't know that I could even argue it to myself, that case. And I noticed that I didn't put the link to Felchlin in here, and I will put the link to Felchlin in here. They're probably the best small chocolate manufacturer in Switzerland. I think the only other company that might be comparable is Lederach, although Lederach was focused mostly on producing products for its own, or producing chocolate for its own product line, whereas Felchlin produces chocolate that other people use. All right, so there's a fundamental difference in the what the two companies' business model is. But and I don't know that I would consider Lederach to be a craft chocolate maker either. But maybe there are for their single origin bars. It's hard to know, but that's not the point that I wanted that I want to hone in on here. It's just that if you go look at Felchlin doesn't refer to themselves as a craft chocolate maker, right? And so for Original Beans to say that they're using craft chocolate, I think is more than a little disingenuous. And by by concatenation for Ocelot to claim that they're craft chocolatiers, right? Maybe, but they're not using quote unquote craft chocolate, they're using industrial couverture. And it's that overlap, it's that place where, oh, how do we differentiate what a craft chocolatier is? Now, is it about intent? I would suggest that it is. And there is a similarity there. So an industrial chocolatier is, let's put it all on large scale machinery. And, we rely on the fact that we have industrial processes to make sure that the chocolate is the same, that the fillings are the same, so that the flow characteristics, so I can put them in the machines and I can just press a button and it runs, more or less unattended. Whereas a craft chocolatier, it's not that they're small batch necessarily, it's just that they recognize that maybe, I don't know, please let me know what you think. I mean, for people who are watching, just go into the live chat on YouTube or in the comments or LinkedIn and Facebook and let me know, am I overthinking this? Or do you have some way to slice this Gordian knot, not Gordon knot, but Gordian knot, that would help us approach finding a solution to the problem? I recognize that there is a problem. I've been noodling on it off and on since Ali emailed me, and I learned that this is where I'm having some fundamental challenges articulating what it is that's going on. So I would be interested in knowing that. And so what I want to do is I want to spend part of the rest of the hour talking about two different situations where this disingenuous transparency, or this errors of omission, or in fact deliberate commission, errors of commission, not just omission, meant the end of a company or the end of a particular instantiation of a company. So the first one that I want to talk about is a company called Noka. And I've linked into, I believe it is a 10-part article series at dallasfood.org, written by colleague Scott, which talks about this company called Noka. And it asks the question, what is Noka worth? And I'm going to do a TLDR on Noka and what's going on here. But Noka at the time was selling very expensive chocolate in very expensive confections, right? So hundreds of dollars a pound, where a high-end chocolate might have been a fraction of that. So, 30%, 40%, some significant fraction of that. But what Noka was doing and not telling anyone is they were saying, our chocolate, our chocolate, our chocolate. That's what they were doing. But what they were doing was buying and remelting couverture from the French maker Bonat. And at no point anywhere on the Noka website or in any of their marketing or in any of their interviews or any of the way that they talked about their company did Noka mention the name Bonat. They gave everyone the impression that what they were doing is they were making chocolate and then taking the chocolate and putting it into bars, making the chocolate and putting them into confections. And if you are, I have had this sort of epiphany in the past. Like, so for one example, I walked into the De Boven store in France, I want to say early 2000s. And at the time, I had been selling Cluizel in the United States to high-end restaurants and to retailers. And I was really aware of the entire Felchlin or the entire Cluizel catalog. And I walked into Boven and I saw that basically everything in the display case that I saw reminded me of a Cluizel chocolate. So the shapes were the same. Some of the transparent the transfers on the top were the same. It was just really, really quite remarkable. And then I discovered that at the time, I don't know that it's still the case, but at the time, virtually all of the chocolate that was in the De Boven case was manufactured by Cluizel. And what Scott noticed is that when you looked at the origin, so the names of the producing countries of the chocolates that Noka sold, and you looked at all of the percentages and you looked at a lot of these things, that everything that Noka did was, oh, just this is what Bona makes, this is what Bona makes, this is what Bona makes. And going through some detective work, he was able to, in fact, determine that what Noka was doing was, in fact, buying in Bona couverture. They were talking about it as if it was their own, and then charging significantly more, like 3x, 4x, or more, what they paid to purchase the chocolate from Bona. And when that became generally known, in large part, in very large part, through this series of articles. And I know that Scott at the time reached out to me and asked me about this. I don't know if I'm in fact mentioned in the series of articles. It's been a while since I've read past part one, but it's really important to understand that when you try to perpetrate a charade like this, errors of omission, errors of commission, that especially in this internet age, that the likelihood of your being caught out is going to be is very, very high. You need to be careful about what it is that you're doing. And this, in fact, so taking the Noka story, this is the issue that Ocelot and Original Beans face themselves. Do they face reputational damage by misrepresenting through errors of omission what it is that they're actually doing? And am I helping in that process? Did Allie help in that process? I mean, do you feel better about Ocelot knowing what it is that I've said? Do you not care? Does it matter to you at all that they are, in fact, not completely transparent about what it is that they're doing? I would prefer that Ocelot be transparent that they're buying, couverture from Original Beans, which was manufactured by Felchlin. I would be much happier if Original Beans were saying, oh, all of our chocolate is made for us by Felchlin. There's nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, Felchlin, in my opinion, in the opinion of many, might be the best small chocolate maker in all of Switzerland and maybe all of Europe, right? Other than companies that are much smaller, that are focusing less on industrial products and more on what we would consider to be craft products. But that is the risk that Ocelot is running, and that is the risk that Original Beans is running. And in that case, I say kudos to Allie for having the courage to step forward and talk about this, because it matters. Right? It matters to me. I hope it matters to you. I hope it matters to tens of thousands, if not millions, of chocolate lovers around the world, that this is what it is that's going on. So quick shout out, Jin Kim is connecting from YouTube saying, just stepped in and you see flashbacks to Noka. I can at least thank them for introducing me to Bona and craft chocolate. So that is an interesting thing. You may never have heard of Bona before you were introduced to the Noka expose on Dallas Food. And so you might have been then curious to see, are they the same thing? What else is Bona doing? And so, yeah, absolutely. Things like this can be a gateway into other chocolates. And so they're not 100% bad. There are, in fact, things which might be good out of it. So, with every cloud, there might be a silver lining. And as you pointed out, the issue with Noka, the silver lining for you was that you learned about this French maker Bona. And Jin, if I haven't shared it with you already, because you often comment on these videos, is that people may or may not know that I jumped into the world of chocolate because I was inspired by the work of the Bona family. They were my first introduction to single origin chocolates in 1994 in the south of France when I was there on a business trip. Right? And I realized a little while later that, there were professional critics for everything you could think of, but there were no professional critics for chocolate. And it was that epiphany that launched my exploration of chocolates, spending 7 years between 1994 and 2001, figuring out how do you be a chocolate critic, right? So, yes, I mean, so in some respect, yeah, there's silver lining that can come from the most unexpected places. And here's a question: if you're watching this, does anybody else have similar epiphanies where you've run across something that didn't seem to be what it represented itself to be, and upon closer reflection, you learned about something else, and now you're a big fan of this something else, whatever it is, whether it's craft chocolate or Bonat or something else, right? That's I would be interested to know. Put it in the comments. The next place I want to go is where Bjorn said, "Is this the Mast brothers all over again?" And the answer is there are connections that we can make between what the Mast brothers did and what it is that Ocelot and Original Beans are doing. What I think that makes it very different is that we're now a decade removed. So the first chink in the Mast brothers juggernaut, right, appeared in this article in Slate magazine, as we can say, in March of 2015. I will say that I met Megan in Austin before this article came out. I'm referenced in this article, and we had a long afternoon's conversation about the Mast brothers and what they meant. For many people, right, the Mast brothers were their first introduction to craft chocolate. Right? If it wasn't Scharfenberger, it was the Mast brothers. The Mast brothers were in the right place, Williamsburg, in Brooklyn, right, with the right product, chocolate, with the right image, and in the right place at the right time, with the right product, with the right image. Right? They were appealing to a hipster community that was looking for alternatives, right, to products. And there are a lot of products which grew out of that part of Brooklyn and at about that same time. So this is a little bit later. So this is 2015. So this is 8-9 years after the Mast brothers founding. What Megan was talking about is that the reputation that the Mast brothers had wasn't really built on the quality of the chocolate that they were making. That if you were to talk to people like me who tasted chocolate professionally for a living, it's like very few of us liked the Mast brothers chocolate. Right? There might have been some that we sort of vaguely remembered in history, and we might like some things other than others. But overall, compared with other makers in 2015, the chocolate was not up to standards. And the Mast brothers didn't help themselves by saying, well, we don't need anybody help. We're not going to enter our chocolate into competitions. We don't need to talk to the press. We don't need to do anything. We'll just do all of our stuff on our own. We'll be iconoclasts. We'll set ourselves separately from everybody else. Dandelion who, right? So 2015 is, what, 4 years after the launch of Dandelion, something like that. I had a chance to meet with Todd Massonis in Paris during the 2010 Salon du Chocolat before Dandelion opened, so or went public. And so that's where my reference is in terms of the timing. But people didn't like them. Why are specialty chocolate shops refusing to carry one of the best known craft chocolate brands in the country? Because it wasn't very good. Right? And it turns out, as we learned later, that the reputation of the Mast brothers was founded on their remelting other companies' chocolate, right? Which makes sense. If you went into the original factory in Williamsburg, they didn't have the production capacity to produce as much chocolate as they did, in the variety they did, in the quantities that they did when they were selling, when they for the first couple of years. So there was this mismatch, right? And you need to be really, 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 really careful about that disconnect. Again, in these days of the internet, you need to be really, really careful about the way your products are represented. If you want to make sure that no one calls you out. The other thing people were going, by the time 2015 came around, these Iowa farm boys who had this nautical background, who were wearing, white lab coats or white lab coats, not chef coats, and sporting off their tattoos, right, had completely changed into this very, very tightly coiffed hipster, 7th Avenue, Fashion Avenue kind of look and feel. And people are going, what's the change here? They didn't get it, that how the brand had changed. And so it's really, so forget the advertisements and videos, but people reacted to the quality of the packaging. So they like the packaging and they like other aspects of it, of the product and the brand, But what people really didn't understand when they were looking at the Mast brothers is that what they had done is they had given up confidence in their own sense of taste to the crowd. So they would go and read people writing about the Mast brothers who weren't experienced in craft chocolate, in blogs and all this other place. And these people were saying, oh my gosh, it's the best thing in the world. It's the best thing in the world. And they were tasting it and going, oh my gosh, I don't like this, but all these other people are saying it's great. The problem must be wrong with my sense. The problem must be my sense of taste, which in my opinion doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And we should be very, very careful to resist the what you might call the Yelp effect when it comes to trusting, to handing over confidence in our sense of taste to the crowd. You may not like it. That's fine. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just not to your taste. It may be good if you walk into a restaurant, maybe the head chef is not there, and today it's the chef de cuisine, and it's just an off night for the kitchen or something else. You need to be really, really careful. You need to be really careful about that. And I think that this article does talk about that aspect of the issue. What we did early on, so between 2007 and 2014 or so, many people, not we, not you specifically, but we ceded our sense of taste to the crowd rather than having confidence in our sense of taste. And that, I think that's always a huge challenge that we need to do it. So here I am. There are defects in every bar and the chocolate is bad. Right? So that was my opinion in late 2014, early 2015, when Megan interviewed me for this article. And there are a bunch of other impressions. And so this is a great article. It's up online on Slate. I recommend that you go take a look at it. I'm getting back to gin. Chihuahua Chocolatier out of San Diego doesn't use any Chihuahua origin cacao. When I asked them about their couverture a decade ago, I think their bars are fun, though. So there is a connection between the Antonorsi family, right, who are the owners of Chihuahua Chocolatier, the founders of Chihuahua Chocolatier. There is a connection between the Antonorsi family and Venezuela, and that's where the Chihuahua came from, right? They haven't used a couverture made from beans from Chihuahua in a very, very long time, if ever. And when they did, it was only for a small selection of products. What you say, I think their bars are fun, though. Absolutely. If you're looking for a mass market bar that's well produced, that's got fun flavors and textures, I mean, Michael has done a great job, right? And although they're not bars that I would choose to consume on a regular basis, right? If somebody hands me one and it's a flavor combination and a texture that I've never tasted before, I know that it will be well made. I know that the balance of flavors and textures will be interesting, and I'm going to try it. As a professional chocolate taster, I want to try everything. I'm going to go there, even though it might not be a brand that I would go to preferentially. I like their work. I first met Michael. Oh my gosh, 2000, around the time he founded the business. I have been to the retail shop and factory outside of San Diego on 2 different occasions, once with my daughter and once on my own, and have nothing but good things to say. As a matter of fact, there's a quote from Michael on the back of on the dust jacket of my book, Discover Chocolate. So I like the guy, and I enjoy seeing him at trade shows. Really, really good thing. So Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce in Kittredge, Colorado. Whenever I visit a chocolate shop and mention the word craft or specialty, I always ask, what beans do you use? The answer tells me scores about their business. So Mark, the answer is absolutely yes. But what you're doing here is you're actually, I think what you're actually doing is going up against a basic misconception that most people have, which is that if I walk into a chocolate shop, the people who are making the products in the chocolate shop make the chocolate that's being used, right? There is this conflation of, melter, chocolatier, chocolate maker. Most people don't think about it. They walk into, for example, a Neuhaus, and they don't know that the chocolate is made by most likely Barry Callebaut. Ali in his article in Cocoa Radar says that Casalucar out of Colombia makes much of the couverture that small confectioners, quote unquote craft confectioners, are using in the UK as an alternative to Calabout or Valrhona or Belcolade or any of the other big industrial brands that are very, very well known. The average consumer doesn't know, right? So they go and they buy a candy bar with the Mars name on it, or the Mondelez brand or a Hershey brand, and they have no idea where the cocoa beans come from or the chocolate comes from. My default position walking into a store, a chocolate store, is that they don't actively represent themselves as we make chocolate from cocoa beans. I assume that they're not making chocolate from cocoa beans. They're buying couverture. That's my default position. I think that when we talk about the equivalent of the null hypothesis in chocolate, that's what you should assume walking into a store. You can look around for explanations to say, oh, we craft our chocolate from cocoa beans, right? And if they don't explicitly say it, chances are they're not actually doing it. That's my default position. And it sounds like you're exploring that difference actively by asking them when you don't see anything. But let's go back to the Mast brothers, and let's go back to another series of articles. This is a 4-part series on the Mast brothers, again at Dallas Food Org, and Scott Johnson, who is the author of these articles, contacted me about being background on this because I was in New York and he was in Dallas, and I had met Rick and Mike on several occasions and had known them since very early on in their chocolate journey. Had visited the factory, both the original factory and the upgraded factory that they moved into when they got investment. So, and this article references the Slate article. What Scott is doing here is exploring the origin story, right? And going back to the fact that if you were to look at us, for example, Smorgasburg, which is this food farmers market which happened in Brooklyn during the summer, specifically in Williamsburg, that the Mast brothers would be there to sell chocolate, and they would be selling chocolate that was made, bars that was made from melted Valrhona. And they didn't mention that specifically, right? What they claimed after the fact, I believe it's in a quote in this article or someplace else, what they claimed after the fact is that, well, if anybody had asked us, we would have told them, right? But the reputation of the Mast brothers early on as being these iconoclastic, fabulous chocolate makers was built on their melting someone else's chocolate and not being open about it. And that's similar to what it is that Ocelot and Original Beans are doing by not being open about the source of their chocolate. Now, I think that, a decade later, we would say that neither Original Beans nor Ocelot occupies the same mind share, has the same, oh my gosh, these guys are like innovating in the world of chocolate. They're doing things that nobody has ever done before, which was not the case then. It's not the case now. That the Mast brothers' reputation was so outsized at the time that this cutting them down, undercutting the foundation of their reputation, reverberated through the industry in ways that, if we were to talk about, Ocelot and Original Beans today, it doesn't have the same effect because they don't occupy the same place, right, in the world of specialty chocolate today. So they are similar in that respect, Bjorn, but they're very, very different. Right? And so you can go through and read what it is that they're doing and how they are representing themselves and all this kind of stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the definitive article on the history of what went on there over the course of roughly 2006, 2007, and to late 2015. So these articles started dropping in early December of 2015. And here's what I know, right? And here's what I'm going to say to the people at Ocelot, at the people at Original Beans, because you own Ocelot, is get out in front of this now. So if Rick and Mike had come out after this first article had published in early December 2015 and said, you know what, it was young, it was the Wild West, we were doing what it is that we were doing, and mea culpa, we weren't being 100% honest and transparent. But right now, everything we're doing is, making chocolate from cocoa beans, and have somebody who knew how chocolate was made. You can come into our factory and you can look at every single process and you can see what it is that they're doing. Now, it turns out that they may not have been able to make that claim. But part of it all depends upon, what you think about cocoa butter as an additional ingredient. If I'm buying in cocoa butter and I'm not making it myself, am I a craft chocolate maker? If I'm using a cocoa butter which is made by somebody else in my chocolate, so if they're buying in from, cocoa butter from Valrhona or cocoa butter from Lucre or cocoa butter from Blommer or lots of the other places, does that mean they're no longer a craft chocolate maker? If so, then there are a lot of craft chocolate makers today, bean-to-bar chocolate makers, who wouldn't qualify, right? Because they're not making their own cocoa butter. So that's another thing. But the disingenuousness here, right, was what did them, which caused their very, very rapid demise in this particular instantiation. And it's all due, again, Bjorn, to the fact that the higher you are, the farther you have to fall, right? They were very high, and that reputational damage just undercut everything that they were doing. There was an article which showed up in Medium. It's no longer there. I responded to it. So I posted on the Chocolate Life, right, an open response to Mast Chocolate. And I think that many people in the industry who, around this time, who were looking at what the Mast brothers did and didn't do. And by the way, I mean, the Mast brothers, after they were in Brooklyn, they opened up in the UK. They had a shop in London. Phil Land of Land Chocolate was a chocolate maker there, and he's gone on to be successful to some extent. I haven't spoken to Phil since the last time I was in London. I want to say October of 2018. But he is somebody who cut his teeth, who learned how to make chocolate at Mast in London. And so we can't underestimate, right, the influence that the Mast brothers had. And I think that, my going back and looking at this again, right, is, I'm not going to nitpick, Rick's and Mike's narrative, their recollections versus my recollections. That's not the point. We're now 7 years removed, right? And then, 3 years removed after that. So we're now a decade past that. And it's like, I don't recall these things closely enough. I'd have to refresh my memory from my notes and emails, a thing like that. But I think that what I came away with this was a profound disappointment. Just really disappointed that the origin story, right, wasn't completely true, right? That to some extent I and many others who relied on the brand were being misled. And I've said this before, is I think that apart from the fact that Mast disbanding, right, after this, so sometimes in 2017, I think, is when they closed down Mast Brothers Chocolate, or Mast Chocolate as it was known at the time. So after London, they opened up a facility in the Arts District in Los Angeles, which was never going to be profitable, but it made sense as a marketing tool. It was never going to be profitable. But taking a look at this, it was just profound disappointment. And I think the largest community that was hurt was the sort of Williamsburg hipster community. The hat wearing, vest and suspenders wearing with cuffed jeans. I know that's a stereotype, but I was living, going to Williamsburg on a regular basis. So I interacted with these people on a regular basis. They were the ones who were most disappointed. And those are the ones who turned on the brand. And those are the ones who started trash talking it and really undermining what it is that they were doing. And then Rick and Mike got involved in the management of the company when they're not really business managers, and they were making decisions about the way the product was marketed and the way the product was sold, and they just had to close down. So you can go and read this post on the chocolate life and learn a little bit more about my response to it, which is just profound disappointment, which is where I think things are. I went and visited the reopened Mast Pantry in Mount Kisco in Westchester County in New York in 2021. So just after travel restrictions related to COVID were starting to be relaxed in my part of the country, I went there with Christopher Curtin, who people may know as the person who worked with Anthony Bourdain and Eric Ripert on the creation of the Good and Evil bar series. So if you don't know that, I know Christopher as the founder of Ocelot Chocolate in Westchester, one word, Pennsylvania. And so he wanted to visit the Mast brothers. He came pick me up and we went and visited them. And so I give you my impressions of the newly revamped Mast Market or Mast Pantry and what they're doing. The chocolate was better. They were no longer doing single origin chocolate. It just technically it was better than it was. So I can let you know about that. So we've got this background. And if you are interested in learning more about Chocolate Tree, which is the business that Alastair Gower and his wife, Freddie, so Ali and Freddie have created in East Lothian in Scotland, you can go and find out what it is that they are doing now, right? And how they are being very, very clear in terms of how they are representing what they're making, what their ingredients are, how they're doing things. In part because, they believe that kind of transparency related to the way they perceive their brand is important to them. And so I really, really do recommend. I haven't been there. I haven't been to Scotland. I'm hoping the next time that I get to the UK, I'm going to be able to go and visit them in Scotland. Make a special 4 or 5 days to be able to get up there and really understand what it is that goes on and do a deep dive on what it is that they're doing. But that's the end of. None of these remarks were really prepared. Just following along on the narrative, going through this primary link construction through the resources and talking about things, and then responding to the comments that have come through. So just want everyone to understand that that's the way I put together today's episode. And we're at the end of time. But if anybody is out there and has a final word about, did you grow up loving Mast Brothers? Did you grow up somebody else? Did you have a particular experience with Mast Brothers or Noka? That again, Jin, you shared that you knew of Noka, but it's how you became aware of Bona and craft chocolate in general. So again, good things can happen. There all these dark clouds. Well, maybe not all these dark clouds do have silver linings. Irrespective of what we think about Mast Brothers chocolate, we cannot underestimate just how influential they were, and in some respects continue to be. We look at, I believe that the approach to packaging that Dandelion adopted is influenced by the Mast Brothers, right? It may be that Dandelion's decision to go with 2-ingredient chocolate was influenced by Mast Brothers. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of companies, small chocolate makers, who remember Mast Brothers, love the look of their packaging, may not have been aware of their chocolate, right? But even today, we can go and see the influences of Mast Brothers on the industry today. So we cannot underestimate just how important they are, or they were, and maybe how important they are, and to recognize that what got them into trouble was not being transparent about what they were doing. In their particular case, it was not only a sin of omission, it was a sin of commission. And this is the lesson that companies like Ocelot and Original Beans need to learn and need to get out ahead of, and be very open and very transparent about, to let people know that this is what we are doing. There's nothing about Original Beans' relationship with Felchlin that undermines any of the other brand attributes in terms of the history of the company. Philip Kaufman, his great-great-grandfather, I mean, I think it was more than that, going back to the late 1700s, wrote books on forestry. I mean, the notion of being, of being for the things that the Original Beans brand is for, right, go all the way back hundreds of years. Nothing about their relationship with Felchlin gets in the way of that. Do they plant trees? Absolutely yes. Did they draw down this amount of carbon? Absolutely yes. Is Philip Kaufman straightforward? Again, I've met him on a number of occasions. I've known him for quite some time. I mean, I've had most of their chocolate at one time or another. Well, I've never been to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is where Virunga is. And I haven't been specifically to the area of Peru where their Peruvian beans come from. I've been to the Beni in Bolivia, although I don't believe that they're purchasing from the Hacienda Tranquilidad, but in the Eastern Beni, in the Antenes. But I have this connection to the people and the company. And in the end, isn't this what chocolate is all about? It's all about making and cementing connections and having, I think that the emotional ties we have to the things that we're doing are really, really important. And I think need to come to the front. And this is where being disingenuous really bothers me. And I want to do a real quick shout out. Here's the Chocolate Tree. Allie, hopefully Freddie is there and she's watching with you. I know it's late in the day and you're coming back from other kinds of meetings. I just want to say thank you very much. I had looked at this story and didn't consider the impact of everything that you had written in it until you reached out via email and said, hey, Clay, did you have a chance to read this? And what do you think about X and Y and Z? And so I have to thank you for the presence and courage to reach out to me and say, this is something that needs to be taken a look at and exposed to the light to see, what we're going to do. And I think it's really important that we do that. And I'm not, so one thing I do have to admit that I find really, really interesting. If you look at the International Chocolate Awards over the last couple of years, you may find that there's an entry at the winners which say that here's a particular brand, but the chocolate is made for them by this company. So if you look at Mabel Cacao, I've met Mabel. She's a lovely person. I enjoy, but the chocolate is made for them by Cacao Suyo, right, in Peru, and they're open and upfront, and that's cool. I think that's really, really good. The Academy of Chocolates had a couverture bar category, but the winners weren't required to disclose the source of their couverture, which I think is a mistaken opportunity. I think we're all good with all of this. We need to be, if I am using chocolate and I'm buying in chocolate and I'm melting it, then if you're embarrassed to mention it, maybe you want to use a different supplier or a better chocolate. But if you're going to be proud of the chocolate you use, be proud of the chocolate that you use. Most people will say, well, I use Belgian chocolate, under the mistaken assumption by most consumers that Belgian chocolate is the finest chocolate in the world. That's arguable. And I've argued against it on quite some time. So just want to let you know that I support these things. Happy if you can go into the comments for this post. So again, everybody, if you go to the bottom of every page, there is a comment section, so a member discussion section. And so if you have some idea, there's some other company that you're not sure of, you want somebody to look into it, or anything like that, go into the comments, let us know, let me know, and I can follow up on it for you. And wow, this is great. I haven't spoken to the people at Chocolate de Sol. If I remember properly, we spent time in Legnano at the FBM factory for a training session a decade ago. You had purchased a tempering machine. So I'm thinking, if I'm thinking correctly, nothing is better than an honest product. I would agree with you. For me, when I've got a product that I like and I discover that the people are not being straightforward, it's like, okay, I can now take them off my I'm going to recommend them list. Or if somebody asks me about them, I'm going to be open about it. But absolutely, yes. And again, again, Chocolate de Sol. I'm thinking the right people. I'm talking about Eurobean. You've got that festival. I'm hoping that you guys are members of the new European Beat a Bar Association. And what you guys will do is reach out to me, because Bjorn, I think it's really important that what we do is we start to regularize the way we use language, and to start getting buy-in that when this group of people uses these words, this is what we mean. This is something that I've been working on, something I've been championing for quite some time. And I hope that you guys will join me in that effort, because I think it's really, really important. And I may be coming, I'm working on ways to provide resources that can be used in these marketing efforts. And then finally, another shout out to Allie and Freddie. Hey, they're both there. Again, thank you very much for reaching out to me and letting me know. Again, I was uncertain, given the original article in Cocoa Radar, that I would do anything this extensive. I might have mentioned it in an upcoming newsletter, but I'm very, very happy that you did, because I've got some responses from people saying it was a great episode. Again, from North Queensland Chocolate all the way in Australia, connecting. Great talk. Thank you very much. And, hey, if there's an Australian Chocolate Makers Association, and, this is something that you would like to be involved in as well, this regularization of the way language is used, so that we can do a better job of expressing ourselves, because there's number one thing that I think is really important, which is behind all of this, which is that if we as craft chocolate makers are confused about what it is that we're doing, if we can't describe what it is that we're doing, right? In the same way, it's no wonder that consumers are confused. And so I think that focusing on the use of language, right, and being consistent around the way it is used will help grow the specialty chocolate, craft chocolate, specialty chocolate, specialty cocoa world. And I think that's a great way to end this, except to say, as I sign off in every episode, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.